A season like 2025 just creates more motivation. MotoG built an entire coping religion around one idea. Time eventually humbles everyone, that the body breaks, that speed fades, that the grid refreshes, that the next generation arrives with cleaner bones and fewer scars, and the old kings become references you argue about instead of problems you have to solve. Marc Marquez just walked into Ducati's team launch at Madonna di Campiglio and killed that religion with one calm sentence. Not with a roar, not with arrogance, with a surgeon's tone. 2025 just creates more motivation. That is not a quote. That is a threat disguised as maturity. Because MotoGP's normal arc is simple. The comeback ends with relief. The trophy closes the wound. The hunger softens into gratitude. The champion becomes human again. Marc is doing the opposite. He's telling you the title didn't finish him. It activated him. And if you accept that, then the central conflict of 2026 is no longer, can he defend? It becomes, what does the paddock do when the champion is not defending a throne, but expanding an empire? Because Ducati didn't just unveil a bike. They unveiled a system that already believes it has solved MotoGP. They're celebrating a centenary year, staring at win number 100 at stacking numbers like monuments, and the man at the center of it is not talking like someone satisfied. He's talking like someone reloaded. One unresolved question rules this entire episode. If a season that should have completed Marc Marquez only made him more motivated, what exactly is the sport supposed to do next? The catalyst is not the livery, the centenary stripes, the polished presentation, the controlled smiles. The catalyst is the way Marc uses language when he's already holding the advantage. At the launch, he spoke about his shoulder and his winter work in the same tone you'd use to describe routine maintenance. He said he's getting better. He said he worked super hard. He framed Thailand as the main target. He mentioned he's already riding a different kind of bike, implying his rehabilitation isn't passive, it's active. Then he delivered the real payload. He talked about butterflies last year, nervous, new environment, new people, new bike. This year, relaxed, familiar, same garage, same teammate, same machine philosophy. He's not walking into the season as a guest hoping to be accepted. He's walking in as the axis. And then he says the thing that should make every rival's stomach drop. It's not that he achieved the target and will drop. It's the opposite. 2025 gave Hauer enough to work a lot again, even through long rehabilitation, thinking only that he wants to taste victory again. Read that the way a team reads it. This is not a rider celebrating success. This is a rider describing a loop. Win. Hunger. Work. Win. The loop is the point. The loop is the addiction. And it lands harder because of what 2025 actually was in canon. Marc dominated on the GP25 and clinched the championship with 5 rounds remaining. That isn't winning. That is early closure. That is narrative strangulation. Even when the season ended with injury after contact at Mandalika, the title story didn't wobble because the title wasn't in danger. The grid wasn't close. It was already executed. So now he arrives to the launch, calm, familiar, and says he's more motivated. That is the destabilizer. Not a rumor, not a paddock whisper. A champion telling you he didn't use the title to relax. He used it to sharpen. And then the second part of the catalyst arrives. Contracts. Marc says his first option is Ducati for 2027, but he needs to evaluate all the things. Ducati's side says renewing world champion is the priority, but they are not under pressure. MotoGP is the only sport where people say, we are not under pressure, directly into a microphone while visibly living inside pressure. The schedule is closing in. The Sepang test is February 3 to 5. Thailand opens the season. Deals are being pushed earlier and earlier. The market is already being seeded with names and pairings. And Marc is speaking like someone who understands exactly what his sentence does to a factory. First option. That's the hand on Ducati's shoulder. Evaluate all the things. That's the knife under Ducati's ribs. Start with the illusion, the version fans want to believe. The illusion is that Ducati is the king and Marc is simply the sharpest sword they hired. The bike is the story. The rider is the highlight reel. This illusion feels comfortable because it spreads credit and reduces fear. If Ducati is the source of domination, then domination is replicable. Then the throne can be taken by another Ducati rider someday. Then the era belongs to the machine, not the man. But this is where the illusion collapses. Ducati has been strong for years. They have built a system that prints performance. Yet nobody, not even inside the Ducati ecosystem, produced what Marc produced. That mid-season run that extinguished opposition, the way he turned weekends into routine, the way he removed the dramatic uncertainty the sport is addicted to. Ducati did not just give Marc speed, gave Ducati inevitability. That is the key difference. Speed wins races. Inevitability wins championships early. And Marc's statements about contracts are not future planning. They are the continuation of the same control. He says, "If I'm in a team where I feel good and I'm fast and everything is working, I try not to move." Notice the structure. He doesn't say I'm loyal. He says, if the environment produces output, I maintain it. That is a champion's politics. Loyalty is conditional on function. Then he says, my first option is Ducati, but step by step. That step by step is not caution, it's power management. It keeps Ducati engaged, it keeps rivals uncertain, and it keeps Marc above the timeline hysteria. Then, contracts are signed earlier and earlier. That line is not an observation, it's a warning. You will not corner me with deadlines. I'm aware of the game. Then, I need to evaluate all the things. All the things is deliberate vagueness. It forces the listener to imagine what it includes. And what it includes is everything that decides whether a rider can keep winning after a regulation reset. 2027 is coming. Michelin exits. A new equal-spec 850cc era begins. That is not just a technical reset, that is a political reset. The factories that win 2027 will be the factories that build the fastest feedback loop under uncertainty. Marc has already lived through a factory whose feedback loop died. Honda did not collapse because they stopped working. They collapsed because the system's answers stopped matching reality. Marc's talent and pain tolerance covered structural decay for too long, until the decline was irreversible. That experience changes how you speak in contract talks. So when Marc says, evaluate all the things, he's not shopping for a higher salary, he's auditing the future. And Ducati's behavior confirms they understand who they're dealing with. They are celebrating the centenary year, pointing to record totals, acknowledging 4 consecutive riders' titles and 6 manufacturers' titles as the result of a precise path. They are framing themselves as a method, and they are holding up Marc and Pecco as 2 champions with extremely strong motivation. But the internal reality is harsher. Pecco Bagnaia is a 2-time champion, 2022 and 2023. That is canon, but 2025 is also canon. He failed to unlock the GP25 and suffered a season-long performance collapse while Marc won the title on the same machine. That creates a hierarchy that cannot be patched with par. In 2026, Ducati runs 4 factory-spec bikes. The structure is built for control, not comfort. And the rider at the center of it, the one whose results rewired the garage's confidence, is speaking like a man who knows the factory will reorganize around him if he demands it. That is why first option matters. It says, I can stay, and you can keep stability. And evaluate all the things says, if stability turns into complacency, I can walk. This is not a rider asking permission to be renewed. This is a king checking whether the castle will still obey him after the earthquake. But this is where the entire story snaps. The hidden contradiction is that Motogp keeps talking about Marc's comeback like it was an ending, like 2025 was the emotional finish line. But Ducati's own launch framing and Marc's own language expose the opposite. 2025 was not closure, it was calibration. The political betrayal is that the Paddock spent 5 years rewriting Marc's identity while he was injured. They needed him to be the old era. They needed the sport to belong to new names. They needed him to be a reference, not a threat. Then the Mugello 2024 pivot happened in canon. Within 24 hours of Marc making it clear Pramac was not an option, Ducati dropped Jorge Martin and signed Marc for 2025-26. That move wasn't just signing a rider, it was declaring that Ducati's future would be built around the most ruthless winner on the grid, not around the most convenient narrative. The technical flaw in the Paddock's belief is thinking a dominant bike guarantees dominant control. It doesn't. Dominant bikes still require riders to manage chaos, variability, pressure, injury, and the grind of an entire season. Most riders survive those weeks. Marc weaponizes them. And the rider psychology rupture is this: Marc is not speaking like someone grateful to be back. He's speaking like someone who remembers what it feels like to be denied, and has decided he will never be denied again. That's why the motivation line is not hype. It's the sound of a man turning victory into fuel, not into rest. Consequences arrive fast when a champion openly announces that success did not soften him. First consequence: rivals lose the comfort of waiting. Motogp is full of riders who survive by timing. They wait for the champion to have a slump. They wait for injuries. They wait for internal team tension. They wait for development curves. Marc's statement kills that strategy, because he is telling you the win didn't create a hangover. It created another addiction. Second consequence: Ducati's internal politics become sharper. In 2026, Ducati's priorities are not emotional. They are mathematical. Win number 100 is a milestone. The centenary is a marketing weapon. The method is the brand. The brand needs continuity. Marc is continuity. Marc is also power, and power changes how teammates are evaluated. Pecco is not being judged against the field anymore. He is being judged against the standard inside his own garage. That is the cruelest possible environment for a rider who already lived a full season of collapse while his teammate wrote history. Third consequence: the rider market becomes a war zone earlier than usual. The more Marc controls the present, the more factories panic about the future. Because 2027 is the trap year for the sport's hierarchy. It's when old advantage can evaporate, when new winners are born, when wrong decisions become permanent scars. Marc baying first option Ducati does not calm the market. It inflames it, because it tells every other factory that the single most important signature is likely staying put. And that means you must build your 27 plan around not having him. That is a nightmare. Fourth consequence: the myth of generational replacement starts to look like fan fiction. Yes, new talents exist. Yes, Toprak is arriving at Pramac Yamaha in 2026. Yes, Pedro Acosta is the most dangerous long-term threat on the grid. Yes, Quartararo's speed still flashes, 5 poles in 2025, even as Yamaha struggles. Yes, Bezzecchi won 3 races in the final 10 rounds of 2025 and gave Aprilia its first back-to-back wins and first 3-win season. All real. None of it changes the core equation of 2026. When the lights go out, the grid is still racing inside Marc's era until someone proves otherwise over time, not in moments. And here is the brutal part. Moments are what fans worship. Time is what champions own. Marc's body has been through war, surgeries, rehabilitation, adaptation. But war doesn't always weaken a king. Sometimes it teaches him which parts of himself are negotiable and which parts are not. Marc is not pretending he's invincible. He's openly managing his shoulder recovery, framing Thailand as the target, positioning Sepang as the first true test. That is not fear. That is professionalism. And a professional Marc is more dangerous than an emotional Marc, because professional Marc does not ride for validation. He rides for outcome. GP24 doesn't cover MotoGP. We document its wars. Subscribe and enlist. Now decode the contract statements like they deserve to be decoded. As weapons. My first option is Ducati. This is Marc keeping the kingdom stable while he negotiates from the throne. It signals to Ducati's partners, engineers, and sponsors that the empire remains intact. It prevents unnecessary chaos. But it also cages Ducati, because once the world champion publicly states the relationship is the first option, the factory is forced to behave like it is also their first option. They cannot flirt too loudly with alternatives. They cannot act indifferent. They must show priority. then step by step. This is Marc refusing to be rushed by anyone's calendar. It's him saying, I decide the tempo, I decide the moment, I decide the terms. The earlier contracts get signed, the more valuable tempo becomes. Then, I need to evaluate all the things. This is the real line. It implies there are items on the checklist Ducati cannot control with horsepower. Items like internal direction, 2027 development influence, resource allocation, and whether the team's hunger remains sharp or becomes ceremonial. A centenary celebration is beautiful, but it can also become dangerous. Celebrations create complacency. Complacency creates blindness. Blindness is how dynasties die. Marc is telling Ducati, don't go soft, not around me. Everything you thought you understood stops working here. Fans think domination creates relaxation. Marc's domination created obsession. Fans think the older champion becomes cautious. Marc became cleaner, colder, and more efficient. Fans think rivals can wait for the champion to have a normal season. Marc is telling you he's not aiming for normal. He's aiming to taste victory again, like a man who finally got his appetite back after years of starvation. And here's the reversal that breaks rivals psychologically. Marc doesn't need chaos to win anymore. In his earlier era, he could win by surviving wildness, by improvising, by turning danger into advantage. Now, on a Ducati that already runs like a machine built for precision, Marc is becoming the final refinement, the rider who reduces variability. That means the grid's usual weapons, weather weekends, unpredictable tire behavior, mid-season momentum swings, become less effective. You can't out-drama a rider who turns drama into routine. You can't out-hustle a rider who makes work his baseline. You can't out-hype a rider who uses hype as noise and keeps his eyes on the only metric that matters, winning again. And now the part nobody is ready for. 2027 is not the salvation people think it is. A reset does not guarantee new kings. A reset rewards the factory and rider pairing that adapts fastest, that communicates fastest, that breaks assumptions fastest. Marc has always been the best in the sport at breaking assumptions. Even when he was injured, the sport couldn't stop talking about him. Even when he was on underperforming machinery, his presence distorted the paddock's risk calculus. Even when he missed races after Mandalika, the championship was still his story because he had already closed the door. So ask the real question about the future. What happens if Ducati remains the best feedback loop into 2027 and Marc is still the rider who compresses uncertainty into points? What happens if the next generation arrives with flashes of brilliance, but cannot sustain the psychological grind of fighting a rider who treats competition like fuel? What happens if the sport's next era keeps getting delayed because the current king refuses to age the way the narrative needs him to? And what happens if the biggest threat to Marc in 2026 is not a rival, but the simple fact that Motogp itself is desperate for a new storyline? Because desperation creates mistakes, and Marc feeds on mistakes. End it where it hurts, because that's where truth lives. Do you really think Marc Marquez will lose his title this year? If you say yes, you were born in 2010 and started watching Motogp in 2020, because you're confusing highlight reels with history. Marc Marquez is not a rider. He is history in motion. He is emotion sharpened into method. He is the king, smiling, mood stay, because the grid still hasn't learned the oldest rule of this sport. When the lights go out, talent matters, but control decides. When the lights go out, history doesn't ask who's next. It remembers who never left. GP24 doesn't cover MotoGP. We document its wars. Subscribe and enlist.